On today's show, we have a special guest. She is award-winning seasoned designer specialized in digital design, design systems, and creative direction. Through her craft and systematic approach, she turns boring software into exceptional user experience coming from branding to products and everything in between. Today, she runs her own studio where she combines industry projects with self-initiated research projects.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is the Human AI Experience podcast.
Can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Lisa, and I'm a digital designer. I've been there for a decade or so, and currently running my own studio where I do everything related to digital design, from branding, product design systems, and creative direction.
Nice. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you became interested in following design career?
For me, it was actually quite evident. I never really thought about what I'm going to do with my life. I just always liked to play with Legos, and we had Knicks. And then at the same time, I was always really much into the arts. So I was always painting or drawing or building stuff. So when I was in high school, the subjects I was best at was math and the arts. And then I found this study called product design, and I went there because it was in the same building as where my sister was studying architecture. And I walked in and I saw the studio, I saw the people and the vibe, and I was just like, this is what I want to do. And it was already pretty early on. I was not even graduated from high school yet that I knew that's what I want to do. And that's kind of how I got into it. Yeah.
I think it's a similar story than ours because we came from our mother. She's an artist, so since we were kids, we were always drawing. And then I followed like an architecture career, the same as you. Like I was like looking at the plans of buildings in the newspaper. So it kind of became something. The curiosity brought me to architecture.
Yeah, it's fun. It's funny that your sister is an architect and my brother is an architect. And I'm a designer. You are a designer. So it's just fun. And what inspired you to start your own company?
I think it's a little bit the same. I never really thought about, now I'm going to start my own company as like an ambition or a goal. It was more like I rolled into it last year, 2 years ago now. Yeah, well, time flies. I was actually doing a project with a startup called Sorted, and I helped them secure YC funding. I also went over there in San Francisco, and just like getting that vibe of being an entrepreneur and seeing that kind of lifestyle was definitely super inspiring for me. At the same time, I was I was in different jobs, all design related, both IC, but also leadership positions. And I also realized like I actually don't know what work means to me, what I want to do with like my craft. And then I also had like an urge, like a curiosity that was like not so much commercial, but very much driven by curiosity. I had some ideas I wanted to explore, and basically I wanted to carve out some time to work on those. So that all combined made me make the decision to go freelance 2023. Yeah, worst timing ever, but worked out. Yeah.
Why do you think it was the worst time ever? What did you feel? What was the
recession? Yeah, everybody was saying like, you should not do it now. Don't do it. But yeah.
Yeah, but I think it would never be the right time.
Exactly.
That's what I experienced.
What's the worst that can happen, right? So it's also work related. So I also like to think about work as I just want to work on exciting projects. And if that means in a company or as a freelancer, to be honest, I don't mind so much what to call it. Yeah.
How do you...
Nice. And what kind of jobs do you develop in your company? Do you like try to get some freelancing from companies, or do you work?
Yeah,
how is
mostly I
your
work with clients.
approach, like,
So both bigger clients, big corporations, but also smaller startups. I do love to work with these like early stage pre-seed startups, because there I can really form, like I can really shape a brand from scratch, build a website, and then also go all the way down to the product experience to really, direct that whole branded experience, and have that holistic approach. I really like that, but at the same time, I also really enjoy working with bigger corporations. Right now, I'm doing an exercise with Egmont. It's like one of the bigger publishers here in Denmark, where I'm helping all the design teams from marketing all the way down to product, streamline their brand and their offerings as well. Yeah. So I really like to do like both kind of things. They're creative in different ways, and the variety is really, really nice. And then when I have downtime, then that's when I do like my personal projects. Last year, that was the dynamic UI design framework. This year, it kind of turned into home renovations, but I would like to pick it up again when that's done after the summer. Yeah.
So do you do like interior design too? Like you design?
Not on a professional level, but it's my own home that I'm fixing up a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
So you mentioned in the beginning that you also paint and you like to, or at least you started like painting, and that kind of triggered that bug that led you into design, right? Can you talk a little bit about, what kind of painting? Is it watercolors, oil painting? Like, do you still do it, or is?
Honestly, it was when I was a kid, and I just was using everything that was available to me. It could be making a house out of cardboard, painting it blue and covering it with stars. I also remember I built like a milking machine for cows, and I decorated it. Like, I mean, all this kind of random stuff. But I actually stopped doing that for a long time. But now, since I'm freelancing, I'm actually picking that up again. And I like to call it artifacts. So I'm also making like random objects with like a twist. During my free time.
Oh, nice. Do you think about doing an exposition, or like maybe like doing art?
I am, and that's where the home renovations come in, right? So I live on the outskirts of Denmark, and there I'm opening an Airbnb, where I'm actually not really advertising it as an Airbnb, but more as like a space for play and art, where I'm planning to curate objects, both from my own, but also maybe from guests. And so very, very small scale, but
that's super exciting, interesting.
Yeah.
So creating your own, art gallery,
exactly,
of some sort.
Exactly.
Especially because I think, is it at Airbnb, you can create these experiences, right?
Yeah.
So you have, I've seen some people offering some courses or some guided tours with like a twist, or some culinary or gastronomy event, but all organized by people in their own spaces, right? So you want to leverage that, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
It sounds pretty cool.
Yes. Do you have any technology applied for these crafts, or do you usually do it by hand? Do you 3D print something, or do you use any softwares, or is it something more manual, or not manual, but handcraft?
Do you mean for like my job as a design business?
I mean more the art crafts, actually.
No, that's completely off grid. That's like all hands on, like no technology involved in that. Because I like to have the contrast with my digital endeavors, and then going completely, hands in the dirt.
Yeah, I totally get you, because we spend so many hours looking at a screen, right? So if your hobbies are also looking at a screen, is tough.
Exactly.
There's like this screen fatigue, and it's not very good.
No, I really enjoy it to the extremes, so to say it. Yeah.
And what kind of softwares do you use in your daily basis, like in your work?
Yeah, so I think my tool stack would be Figma, probably 70% of my time. Aspen and Sigma, also Webflow, Framer, the whole Adobe suite as well. And then, like Slack, Notion, ChatGPT. I've dabbed around with Midjourney, DALL-E as well. Firefly. I think that kind of sums it up. Yeah.
Have you been using those AI tools on a regular basis?
I wouldn't say regular basis, but I have tapped into them. So it depends a little bit on the projects I've been working on. So for some like exploratory projects, I've used Midjourney and DALL-E just to see like where can the creative direction take us. ChatGPT, I use that quite regularly, almost daily, mostly because I'm not a great writer. So I always like to just write something myself and then put it in and then like, hey, make it a little bit nicer. But I actually end up always editing it myself afterwards. So I would never like copy paste directly. I think it still feels a little off to me. I have used it for prompt engineering for clients though, when defining brand voices and tone of voices. I think that can help a little bit to steer them in a direction as well. That's kind of it.
Can you elaborate a bit on how, when you mentioned using it as to define tone of voices for clients, how are you doing that? How can you, like, are you creating a specific ChatGPT with their parameters, or you're basically using the, prompting yourself until you get the results you want?
Yeah, I definitely prompt myself, but then, so I offer this, I offer this brand workshop, and in that workshop, I help the client to define this like brand personality. And that's based on both like the brand archetypes, but also a lot of different other factors that we define in that workshop. And then I kind of put all that into a prompt, and then ask ChatGPT, for example, like, hey, write a landing page hero section in the tone of voice written from this brand personality. And that's how I then define it. Yeah.
And how is the feedback from the clients? Are they enjoying like this kind of approach? Do they think it's working?
Very much. Very much so. I've only used it though on like these small early seed startups. And for them, it's really empowering because that means that they can just, with one prompt, create a lot of content. It saves them time. They don't have to hire a copywriter. So I think it can really get you from 0 to 1 for early stage startups. Yeah.
When you offer this kind of service when you have a bit of copywriting into it and you're giving like some brand direction, and by using AI, do you charge it differently, or you're kind of like assimilating those tools and into your workflow for this particular cases, but that doesn't have any added costs to the final client? How you're like how are you handling the use of AI embedded in your framework? Is that reflecting?
I don't say like, hey, this is done by AI, or I just see it as it's another tool that I'm using to do my work. And I don't see it as something I should charge extra for, because they also have access to it. And it just wouldn't make sense in my head to say like, hey, I did this with AI, but now you have to pay $100 fee because I did it with AI. I think that's a bit ridiculous. So
that definitely makes sense. I was just curious.
Yeah, of course.
I know you have done a project with Lego using AI. I think it's called Dynamic User Interface Design Framework. Is that correct? Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Go through the process. How did you came up with the idea? How did you also get invited by Lego to do this workshop? So
yes, gladly. So the Dynamic User Interface Design Framework was actually my first research project that I did. I did that completely independent. I had some help from 2 interns. And the idea actually came from, I was I was working as a consultant before, and I felt that a lot of my work became very repetitive and very much the same. And when I was just browsing through apps like Wolt, like food delivery apps or like recipe apps or whatever, it all started looking the same for me. And I really lacked that challenge to be more creative, but at the same time also more inclusive, because we have all different needs. Our brains all work differently, but still all our apps look exactly the same. So how can we build apps that are a little bit more personal, a bit more inclusive, but also more imaginative? So that was kind of the starting point of this project. And then the question was, okay, can we make UIs dynamic? So can we make them change shape, change color, change spacing, whatever, based on the user needs or based on the environment the user is in? And we narrowed that actually down based to external data. So what data can we use to make these UIs dynamic, beyond just like black and white mode? So from that became like a framework, and it's kind of like a new way of thinking about creating interfaces. And it starts with thinking about future world scenarios. So really thinking about, okay, in a world 50 years from now, this specific scenario is happening. What does that mean for a UI? And we built these scenarios based on a technology and a social theme. So it can be, for example, food and CRISPR. And then based on that, we wanted to build like a framework, kind of like a narrative to build these future world scenarios. But quickly we actually found out that it's really hard to narrow it down in like, a fixed sentence where then the user of the framework would then fill out those words. So then we actually started prompt engineering and ask like the Jambot in FigJam, like to come up with these future world scenarios. And then we actually created a pretty good prompt that works by combining then the technology and the social theme. And for example, I wrote down one to give an example. In a post-apocalyptic society, a group of survivors uses CRISPR to engineer their own food sources, leading to unexpected consequences as they unknowingly consume a genetically modified organism with a hidden agenda. So it's these kind of tiny sci-fis that sets the scene for the start of the process. And yeah, we experimented quite a lot to get this as an output, but it really hit the head on the nail as where we wanted it to be. And then using that story as like the first step in the thought process, and then you go into, okay, what data do we have available from this future scenario world? Which UX case do we have? And then what design attributes can we actually link to this data to create that dynamic UI? So that's like in short the whole thought process. And yeah, we played a lot with Jambot. We also embedded it in the framework. And it's just a really nice way to think very broadly and out of your comfort zone about UX problems. And I presented it on Happy Futures Lab. It's like a small organization doing a lot of like future thinking work. And it was like an online workshop, and there one of Lego's designers was attending, and then she invited me to also host it at Lego, and it was amazing and was really well received. And now I'm slowly starting to work on the second part of the framework, and that's actually like a dynamic token system to then link to the design attributes so people can actually build these prototypes.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So yeah, very super interesting that you created. Like what it consists of is like mostly like generating these scenarios. And can you guide me through maybe an example? So you mentioned the post-apocalyptic example as a prompt to start with, right?
Yeah.
But can you give like a practical example? I don't know if you presented like a practical scenario when you presented to Lego, or how, and then what is the outcome? Is it like something in Figma that you can work with, or is like a user journey?
So the framework consists of 5 steps, if I remember well. But it's a bit difficult to like walk you through it with an example because just top of my head. But that's also why I offer it as workshops. It's best if you experience it yourself. You can also download it on Figma, and it's free in the community page. But bottom line, you walk through these different steps. The first one is inspire, and that's where you create that future world scenario. The second one is called investigate, and that's where you're gonna investigate this future scenario based on you're gonna find what data do we have in this world. Then the third step is the identify step. That's where you're gonna decide like, okay, what is the UX case we're gonna work on? For some companies, they already have one. For others, it's more like an exploratory exercise. So we have built like a little tool where you can then combine like a device and a specific like UX case, a little bit inspired by daily UI challenges. And then the fourth step is imagine. That's where you're gonna ideate. So that's where you're gonna think about, okay, for example, an alarm app based on weather data and based on the amount of time I slept, for example. And I want this alarm app to be not on a UI, but maybe on my AI pin that I have. So there's also like these kind of non-classic devices involved as well to again tap into that like future thinking. And once you come up, and that's very like sketchy, like you just have to sketch something or you write down like ideas. It's not super like important that it's like pixel perfect. And then in the last step, that's where you're going to think about input and output. So now that you have like your concept and the data, you're going to think about, okay, what are the design attributes that we need for this concept to be dynamic? So is it color? Is it typography? Is it contrast? Is it size? Is it sound? So we have like a bunch of these design attributes that you can pick from and then link that with the data. And then you have like your dynamic UI design idea ready to start developing on. And that's also the output. So it's like an idea that you can work from. And that's also why I mentioned that there's a second part coming, where I also want to make it possible for designers or creators to actually build that UI in Figma with the help of tokens.
So it's basically guiding let's hypothetically speak of a client through a thought process where the result will potentially change depending on the data you have available, and of course the initial scenario that sets the context for that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, quite interesting.
Exactly.
So, and the second step is just, okay, how you, in practical terms, you can take this dynamic idea with its data and materialize in an interface that can adapt depending on, to your example of the alarm, depending on the weather, your alarm will behave differently and your interface will adjust to that. Is that more or less the thought process, or what do you?
That's spot on. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome, super interesting. Did the presentation you did with Lego was mostly to teach them this methodology, or like how did they plan to introduce that into their workflows? How was that? How did they react to that?
Yeah, so to be honest, I wasn't so sure what they were going to use it for. It was just presented as a workshop, and I've also let them do it while I was presenting it. But I always ask afterwards, like, will they use it? Do they see potential in it for their own workflows? And the answer was definitely yes. And I also got, I don't want to jinx it, but I also got like an invitation to come again to do it like more broadly, because now it was only 1 hour and it's actually a little bit too short. Like I think you need 2 hours to do it properly and to give yourself the time to comprehend like the steps and also do it. And then, yeah, So I would love to come back there and do it a little bit more in depth, and hopefully by then also present the whole like second part of it, so they can take it to the next steps.
Awesome.
Both Lego and when I presented it in Happy Futures Lab, I got very positive responses that people were like, yeah, we want to embed this in our workflows because it really gives us a new perspective to what we're building. Yeah.
Especially because at least now that we're doing this podcast, I've been reading a lot about AI and exploring different tools, and there is a lot of conversation around the future, right? How some people say that we're moving with generative AI or this large language models, we're moving away from apps and interfaces, not interfaces, but there might be a scenario where you will have like an AI assistant and you don't have any apps on your phone, because the AI assistant will create those apps based on your needs and your context, which is crazy to think about as designers, because everything that we do is kind of like we try to extrapolate all the scenarios, but at the same time, there's a limit of how your imagination can go and how flexible your interface needs to be in order to be usable, accessible, intuitive. There's a limit of how many scenarios you can actually test it out. But in this case that I'm referring to, it's going to be auto-generated. How do we designers make sure that is actually accessible at a certain level, because it's very unpredictable since it's dynamic, right? So yeah, it's an interesting food for thought, thinking about the future of AI. Do you have any thoughts on how you see this technology evolving and how?
So many. I think to directly tap into what you just said, right, that basically with dynamic UI as a designer, you lose the control over the actual pixels that will be outputted in the end. I've also been doing a lot of creative coding, and in those pursuits, I've also created programs that actually developed, for example, logos for me and then generated different versions of that. And I feel like the role of designers are changing in that regard, where we become a little bit more like curators and less designers, but there's still a whole lot to do in the space of curation. Because in those programs that I've developed with processing, that's very much like, okay, the pixels have to be between X is 100 and X is 200. So you're still very much in control of that. But through those rules, you can still create like an aesthetic or a UI or whatnot. Yeah. So yes, I see that definitely changing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we like to say that we're gonna be the creators, as you mentioned. Like we both believe in that, and it's definitely. As you mentioned, like we can extract and do a lot of things faster and easier. Let's say you put a prompt and then you can evaluate where it's going. So I think that's the role of the AI, like to make us be more, I don't know, leave a bit of space to be more creative. Like you put a lot of ideas at the same time, and then you don't need to draw all these ideas. You can just render an idea faster, and then you create and redo it. So in these terms, I think it's a better process, like in a creation way.
Yeah, and I think that's the second part to it, right? So I really do hope that AI will take away a lot of the tedious tasks that we have to do. I'm very happy to see Figma taking the first steps in that. For example, naming the layers. I think it's such an amazing feature. Like it's so good for my OCD. So yeah, and I hope to see like lots more of those, so we can actually focus a little bit more on the creative part and get more creative headspace. To then again also to go back into what I said about apps looking the same. maybe it will have a opposite effect, that AI will create maybe a lot of like similar apps, but at the same time, it will also give us more headspace to think about, okay, how can we actually stand out in this similarity? And that's something I'm really excited about.
I have a feeling that we like design is changing, but there's a lot of space for the psychology part, right? Or all the whole user experience, basically, and how to use these tools and how to use this to position yourself as curator, right? You also need to you need a lot of experience to also be a good curator, right? You're not gonna like everything that you study, like your references, like understanding what's good design, like position of things, the whole what is it called? It's not Bauhaus. The hierarchy, the difference. I forgot the UX term for that. When you position things and hierarchically,
the law of UX.
If they're closer to each other. You could say laws of UX.
Yeah.
Yes. So you still need to know a lot of the theory and have experimented a lot to be able to curate interfaces or designs. So, but I think a lot of the execution will be automated, and we will just steer the execution. Even though I do enjoy doing, I would assume you also do. But again, if you can be more productive, or you can eliminate some of the boring tasks, is already a good start.
Yeah, I'm a little bit like in between about that, to be honest, because there is also something, for me at least, going through the design process also shapes the design. So when I'm drawing by hand my wireframes, that's also when I start thinking about things I would otherwise not have thought of. And I don't see that thought process being replaced by prompt writing immediately. But I'm also curious to see like how that would evolve. Like the whole, like writing a prompt and boom, you have a whole app interface. I think that's a little bit, I'm curious to see how that will work. Will people actually connect to those apps, or I'm not sure.
What I think, maybe while we are drawing, it will render at the same time, so you can actually draw something and then you can see like easily. Maybe that's the future, because I do believe, as you mentioned, like I like to draw by hand. I don't have the best rendering drawings, but they put out the ideas from my head, so I think they're super necessary for my creative process. So I don't want to get rid of that. But if I can put that and create, for example, a render of a building from that, like easily, it helps me to see if my idea is coming from to a good pathway or a bad pathway, so I can just get rid of it.
Yeah.
So that's...
Yeah, that definitely. I totally agree with that. Yeah. Or like one thing I also never, when you have an app, then you have to design like, oh, what's the success state? What's the error state? What's the warning state? All those kind of things. I think I would be happy that AI could do that for me.
Yeah, it's basically a checklist, right? So all the different states that needs to be there to give feedback and then to be very intuitive. But today we kind of have to put them manually, and if we get one, somebody's going to pick it up, and then we're missing this state.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe Figma will have a client, a AI bot that is a client, so he will use the app for you, so you can see if the framework is is working, and you can change it. It might be something, I don't know, that can help.
Yeah.
Lisa, you mentioned about creative coding. What do you mean with that, and how is the working flow of this process?
Creative coding, I see for me, is just another tool to bring ideas to life. And what I like about it is that with a few lines of code, you can create many variations of the same idea. And I did a project for Creative Coding Utrecht. It's like a foundation doing a lot of workshops, exhibitions, shows to actually facilitate creative coding in the Netherlands. And their logo is basically just a piece of code that then generates itself infinitely. And for me, it's a really powerful tool because, again, it puts you in the shoes of a curator instead of a designer, but also gives the client a lot of empowerment to develop their own version of the logo and to expand the brand to their likes and to whatever they would need in the future. So they become less dependent on you. And then again, it also is a really nice way to experiment with web interactions, for example. I started doing it around 2018, where I actually was really fed up with web design and design systems, and everything just really looked the same. I was doing a lot of landing pages for startups back then, and it was always the same. Like you have a hero section, you have a little bit like testimonials, a bit about the features, and I just thought like, there has to be more than this. And then I tapped into the creative coding community and started learning that. And it just like gives you more, it makes you, starting over. It allows you to think in different ways because you're going to think a little bit more again in like input and output. Oh, what if I put my mouse here? Maybe I can show a rainbow of images instead of just like making the image a little bit bigger. And I think what I like mostly about it is that you can think more freely because the tools that we work with today, like Sigma or Webflow or Framer, they kind of serve you on a platter what you can do with it. But when you tap into code, it's like infinitely. You can do whatever you want. And I think sometimes it helps me to really, to create these little exceptional moments in apps or websites to lift products to a higher level.
So what are the trends do you foresee in the future of digital design, especially with the increasing AI technologies being integrated in workflows?
So I hope to see less of prompting because I don't like writing so much. So I don't really see my career going into just writing prompts. So I hope less prompting, but I think there will be more sameness. So I think landing pages, onboarding flows, checkout flows, things like that will be more and more similar. But I also think there will be more diversity at the same time. How? I don't know yet, but there are already like apps trying to be completely different than what we've seen so far, and I really liked it, and I think that AI will help us do that. So I think the balance will be maybe a little bit more equal in that. But what I also see is that, or what I hope to see is that AI will take a little bit more of a backseat. And it's such a new technology, and I hope to see less like, oh, we made a chatbot for this or we made a chatbot for that. I hope that it will be more and more integrated with our just day-to-day software and where it almost becomes invisible to make our work lives or personal lives easier. Yeah.
When you talk about AI, and then do you think it's AI is bringing more of the same? All the database from the AI, they are kind of the same. So when you see that applied in design, do you think it's more repetitive, this kind of designs?
Yeah, because what AI gives you is based on already existing data. And for me, design is also a lot about innovation. And you will never get that if you always base your first drawing on AI. So I think either we're going to see a lot more of the sameness, but I think if we embed it in our processes to give us more headspace to do more creative stuff, we will also see more creative and diverse solutions.
I think that's the ideal scenario where, like you mentioned, AI takes a back seat, automate a lot of the boring tasks, and allow for us to have our creative space back. Because today, the life of a designer is like in between meetings, like depending on where you're working, you have to divide yourself doing some documentation, meetings, alignments. There's not that much space or much time in a day for you to actually invest in creative work. But if AI takes some of that things away, then suddenly there will be more space for creativity, and I'm definitely hoping for that.
Yeah, same.
Do you have any recommendations you would give to designers who are starting out now regarding design and also regarding the use of AI?
I think my biggest one would be don't stare too blindly at learning the tools. So, for example, knowing how to use Figma doesn't make you necessarily a good designer. I think there's a lot to be said about design processes. Make sure to think your ideas through, test them both with users, but also talk to developers about it, to actually make sure like what you're designing makes sense. Know your world is my second one. So look for inspiration outside of the TikTok feed or the Figma tutorials. I mean, they're great. I learn from them as well. I keep learning from them. But there's more to design than just that. I think my greatest sources of inspiration have never came from sitting on my desk. It's always from doing something completely different. So that would be my second one. And my last one, dare to ask for help. I think there's just so much to learn. There's so much like that's changing all the time. Find mentors, find people you can trust, and talk to them about it, and ask for help if you need it. People are more willing to help you than you might assume.
Awesome. So I think we can start wrapping up, because I think we kind of like got through most of the questions. So Lisa, thanks so much for joining us here at the show, and where people can find you online.
Instagram, a little bit on Threads, and also on LinkedIn. I am in the process of a rebrand myself, so my name is going to change pretty soon. But right now, that's Frosnapers, Frosnapers. And on LinkedIn, that would just be my name.
So we came to the end of our episode. If you're interested in how AI is evolving and how you can introduce it in your life or your work, subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcast service and follow us for more. Let's explore AI together. If you have any questions for us, you can reach out to us at hello@humanAIXP.com or connect with us on Instagram @humanAIXP. Thanks for listening. See you next week.